Hello and welcome once again to another Human Synergistics webinar. My name is John Van Etten, and I'm happy to be joined today by Christian Sellars. And we are talking on the topic of helping leaders to drive and impact organizational performance and how we can help leaders by helping them to let go. So joined today by Christian Sellars, accredited practitioner in Human Synergistics tools, head of transforming engagements as a consulting organization, a long background in pharmaceutical organizations, and also a recent focus, particularly in organizations in East Africa, specifically in Rwanda. So we're here to talk today about leadership and culture development using human synergistics tools and some of Christian's fantastic experiences using these instruments with organizations. So thank you for joining today. Thank you, Christian, for your insights and experiences. I think everyone will be excited to learn from them.
Thank you, John. It's a real privilege to be here. Thank you.
Good. So the title today, in terms of what we're really focusing on, has to do with helping leaders to let go and trust as an essential element of leadership development. So maybe we should start there in terms of why that's an important aspect of leadership and how we see that in organizations playing out.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, John. So the focus for today's discussion comes from work, as you mentioned, that I've been doing in Rwanda over the past year or so. And the thing that's been very striking about my use of human synergistics diagnostics, which I've based all my work on, is that it has shown this funny juxtaposition of really constructive leadership styles. Most of the leaders I've worked with nearly 40 now, and I've done a number of culture surveys in different organizations as well, have a very intuitive sense of what kinds of leadership works. So really good focus on helping people excel, very high focus on integrity and on building collaborative, supportive organizations. That's definitely there. But it's also held back to a large extent by a lot of control and by a lot of anxiety. And I guess the thing that I've been trying to unpick is what's the driver of that? And also, how do you convince leaders that if they let go of that stuff, the sky doesn't fall on your head, things actually get better? And a lot of this has to do with developing trust and developing relationships where you basically put yourself in a position of vulnerability with respect to your reports and your peers. And I think that's something that folks struggle with everywhere. It's a universal challenge in leadership, but I think in Rwanda particularly, because leaders take their work very, very seriously. And they have a very high sense of personal responsibility. And to be honest, it kind of gets in the way.
Yeah, that was getting to my question I wanted to kind of lead in with next is why Rwanda? So these are important topics for leaders really everywhere, but why the focus in that area?
Yeah, very good question. I found myself actually at the end of my last job. I'd had a long career in the pharmaceutical industry. One of the last things I did was go to a conference in Rwanda. And while I was there, I leveraged my network. I knew an oncologist at the University of Pennsylvania called Larry Shulman, who had set up a cancer hospital in Rwanda. And he knew a couple of other people who networked me. And I met with Julian Euler, who's the CEO of Inkamoko. Now, Inkamoko actually is one of my clients currently. I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying that. And they are an extraordinary organization. They basically provide capital and entrepreneurial skills to folk who are generally in refugee camps, folks who are desperately trying to pull themselves up. So they do extraordinary work, but also have a very, very progressive approach to how they run their organization. So I met with Julian, it was about 2 years ago now. And I said to her, I'm thinking of doing something else. My background's in health and health economics. I'd love to do something in health development. And we spoke a bit, and I spoke a lot about the work I'd done in leadership, how I love building organizations. And she was like, your skills are probably much more focused and much more relevant there. Why don't you focus on that? And with the help of some of her team, Barbara Matoni, particularly the HR lead for Inkamoko, I then set up this organization. And so for me, it's been a journey for me, just learning, developing my own skills, but also having a client base where a lot of this thinking is relatively new. There are service providers that do this work, but to some extent, it's been a very receptive audience, and an audience where people have taken the kind of the insights that human synergistics delivers with very little cynicism. It's been very open. There isn't the same kind of jaded, oh my God, not another leadership workshop vibe that you often get in blue chip companies, certainly in the US and Australia. So that for me has been a really positive part of working there. And yeah, I mean, we've passed the sort of 1 year mark where most small companies fail. So I'll take that as big tick. And we've, as I said, we've done a great number of workshops and individual coaching and team and organization based assignments. And from that, I think some really good insights have arisen, which we can discuss.
Yeah, fantastic. Very much look forward to it. So, how many projects has it been? You've been, it's been both culture as well as leadership, I think, is the focus. So,
yeah. So leadership impact is coming close to 40. So we've done a lot of leadership impact research, and with your team, I've put together a lot of composite reports, which many of the insights come from. There's definitely a profile, and we've seen this from other human synergistics research, where countries tend to gravitate towards a particular leadership style, which seems to be most common. And that's certainly the case in Rwanda, as it has been in places like Germany and Australia and elsewhere. Right. So that's definitely something that helps me. It also then gives me insights about where to focus. There are some aspects of culture that you can't really shift because they're universally accepted and you kind of have to live with. And there are other bits of culture where you can see if people do certain strategies that we know from the research don't work, they're particularly problematic in environments with a profile, such as the Rwandan one. So having that research background has been really helpful. I've also started just in the past year doing culture surveys for companies. And again, that's been fascinating because it looks at the leadership impact and how then that changes the way people work, particularly on confidence. That's the one thing that I think there's a lot of potential in Rwanda universally, is like, how do you build confidence as leaders? And that for me is something that is fascinating. And I'm seeing the results of well-intentioned leadership strategies that kill people's confidence and how that ultimately hobbles organizations, which we can talk a bit more about.
Yeah, happy to. Very cool. Happy to get into it. Happy to. So, good. So it sounds like you're starting to see those kind of high level patterns that we notice as well. You mentioned Australia, Rwanda, I'm sure has its own. I mean, this is sort of part of the fun, I think, of working on topics like culture, is that not only is every organization different, but when we move to different parts of the world, we see different, trends and patterns and traditions and how leaders do things and how things are designed in organizations, and see how that plays out. And anyway, I think it really adds to the breadth of the work that we do, and also really helps us to support our clients, because it's helpful to understand, what is their unique perspective, what is their unique context, and operating within that, what can we do to focus on where we're going as a business and guiding people forward. And anyway, I always find that as a helpful conversation for organizations as well, recognizing, kind of what is the environment and the context that we're in, and what is within our organization and within our kind of ownership to action, and what can we do basically regardless. And I think that goes back to some of the things you've talked about. Anyway, I'm happy to get into those, but every place we go, there are certain things that just sort of they're accepted, and that's but we can still operate around that. There are a lot of other sort of like climate factors, right, getting ahead of ourselves, but there are so many areas that we can focus on that even if a few of them are fixed, or at least at the moment, unchangeable, there are a lot of other things that we can do to send the right messages and enable people to work in the ways that drive business forward. So fantastic. Very, very cool stuff. So I'd love to dig into more about what you're seeing in Rwandan businesses, given the sample still, but what those patterns are, where you think those might be coming from. I always find those things
Well, I have to ask a culture question. Did you ever watch that Russell Crowe movie, Master and Commander, from about 10 years ago? Do you remember that?
Oh goodness, I think I do. Yes, I think I do.
So
Yes, vaguely.
that was based on a book by a guy called Patrick O'Brien. He actually wrote about 20 books in that series. And one of the most fantastic things, it's basically about naval supremacy and what was it about the British Navy that made them, so successful for like 200 years or whatever it was. And one of the key things actually in that book that comes out is leadership, and how you teach people, particularly how sailors learn from each other, and how you get a group of 150 people to be at sea for 6 months and not kill each other. So, I mean, it was really, really, the book is beautifully written, very fun, but also has some deep insights. And one of the most profound insights that young sailors have to learn on these big man of wars with big square sails and lots of complexity is a way to make a boat go faster isn't to put up more sails. And that's always a challenge that young sailors have, is they always think the more sails we have up in the wind, the faster the boat's going to go. And that's actually not true, because if you put too many sails up and you put the wrong sails up, you actually drive the boat into the sea and it slows it down. So the key thing in making a boat go fast is actually balance. It's not sail area. And that for me is something that is so relevant to the Rwandan situation, because you have people who just keep putting sailcloth up, and they already have the sails that we know work, and these are the constructive sails, the humanistic, encouraging, the self-actualizing, all the blue things behind your head. Those are the things that we know drive organizations successfully. The challenge in Rwanda is, there's a lot of anxiety about, I'm not enough, I'm not doing enough. And consequently, leaders then feel they have to heap on all these other things in order to do their job as well. And the challenge with that is, in the same way that if you put up too many sails, then sure, you get more power, but that power doesn't actually move you forward. It pushes the nose of the boat into the sea. Likewise, if you're putting up the wrong sails or too many sails, then you're going to drive your organization into the ground. And that kind of is what I observe. So, I mean, Rwanda has an enviable kind of pattern of constructive behaviors. When I first saw this, I thought, okay, maybe this is a little bit of bias or it doesn't really work. But then I went from 6 leaders to 12 leaders to 20 up to 40. It's consistent. People really understand how to get teams of people to work well. There's something innate about kind of social awareness, social consciousness that just gives leaders these skills in the Rwandan context. The challenge is that is really slowed down by 2 things. The one, which your organization has spoken about before, what we call the bow tie. And the bow tie is where you have folk who are perfectionistic and where they are attached very strongly to very, very high standards on the one hand. And the bow tie, it's called that because it's how it shows on the human synergistic circumplex. So on the one side, you've got this aggressive behavior in terms of perfectionism. And on the other side, you've got very high convention, which is kind of universal in Rwanda, this very high adherence to rules, an idea that rules are more important than anything. Now, the problem with perfectionism and convention together is like a bow tie, it chokes you, it goes around your throat, and it prevents people from doing anything. And so that's one particular extra push that I see leaders constricting their own people with. And the other one is what I've called the block. It goes back from my history of playing cricket in my youth. If you basically just put your bat down when you're playing cricket and you just block every ball that comes, you protect yourself, but you also don't score any runs. And so you're not going to win as a team. You actually have to get out and do things. And the block for me, again, it's because it's like this bat at the bottom is avoidance. So that's pretty much, not on my watch. Don't make any mistakes. And the other one is oppositional behavior, which is kind of my way or the highway. I'm going to stop anybody else doing things I don't like. And I'm going to increase my influence basically by preventing other people from exercising discretion. So these are 2 things I see. Bow tie, which is largely perfectionism and restriction, and the block, which is don't make mistakes, don't do anything that makes me feel uncomfortable. These 2 behaviors really get in people's way.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Yeah, I love the term for the block. I think that's a great one because it is something we experience pretty frequently in terms of, if we're looking at patterns of behavior and the primary approaches that people or, the culture is taking has to do with what we call oppositional and avoidance, then, that really tells you a lot about what you're going to experience as you try to coach this leader or develop this team, shape culture, and so on. Those are notoriously challenging patterns to deal with, particularly in terms of change. They're sort of change resistant inherently. And so creating change in organizations and developing leaders and teams who are focused on those patterns quite strongly is a challenge. So, but it's nice to know that ahead of time, sort of know what those approaches are and have a good strategy for dealing with them. The other combination you described, the perfectionism and conventional. So this is referring to human synergistic circumplex and the fact that if we have opposite styles on the model, they sort of look like a bow tie, and that those patterns are fairly uncommon. Usually opposing patterns are actually negatively correlated, so those patterns usually don't go together, but they are kind of a fascinating aspect of behavior in one sense, because even though those patterns typically are sort of counter to one another, it is possible to create teams and organizations and basically environments that encourage that kind of combination. And that's also true of a few other combinations, a couple of other bow ties in the profile. But perfectionism and conventional is fairly unusual. I have run into it in the past a few times, but to see it as frequently as you have, that does maybe speak to something broader, like national cultures, broader cultures that are being brought into the organization, especially if we're seeing that across different OCIs as you're working in that area. Which may speak to again, kind of broader historical lessons and impacts that people are carrying along with them in terms of what they've learned in their lives works, what protects me and keeps me safe, and therefore we bring those strategies along with us to work and in our leadership roles, and lo and behold, they begin to play out in our organization's culture. So does that ring true? Does that sound like something that
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think a lot of it also is brought about by sort of pressure and the pressure that leaders feel themselves under. I mean, Rwanda, as you no doubt know, it has a very particular history. And yesterday was actually the commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsi. It happened 31 years ago.
Oh,
and so, it is a country which has this defining trauma that everyone basically thinks about. Everyone is absolutely focused on ensuring never happening again. And that imbues everybody's work really with, it's more than just a job. Folk don't have the same kind of free and easy childhoods and backgrounds that you and I, hopefully had. There's as much more the sense of, the reason we work is because it's a vocation, and if our country doesn't develop, it puts us at risk and it makes us vulnerable. Now, that is, from a nation building perspective, you totally can understand that. It's a similar narrative that, in fact, most nations have gone through because of some defining historical kind of event. The challenge with it is it means that folk take everything very, very seriously. And the impact of that is that if you have folk in powerful positions taking everything seriously, it creates a level of anxiety and stress that is sometimes counterproductive. And that, I think, is the key thing that you have to try and work on, is getting leaders to ease their grip on the controls, just to let go a little bit, knowing that you're still accountable. Your authority isn't threatened. You can still get good results. In fact, your results will improve if you create a little bit of space for other folk. So I think the culture, to some extent, is framed by that. It comes from a good place, and that is that people take work seriously and people want to be successful. The difficulty comes in is then, how does that cascade? Because within a collective where everyone is like, we're all on the same team here, we're all like, give us a go, give us a chance. We want to help you. We're actually here to help. You sometimes find staff thinking, spending a lot of time and energy managing the anxiety of their bosses, as opposed to talking to customers or creating new things or being creative. So you've got that sort of tension. which is something that I spent quite a bit of time coaching people on and helping them to experiment and try stuff out, which I think is probably the best way of moving forward with it.
Yes, no, I would agree, and that's the sort of learning process and questioning that people have to sort of find their way in as we realize, what is it that we're what we're really doing? What are the patterns that are playing out, and how is this affecting our people and moving forward? Exactly. Yeah, that's that, and that's a good. I always enjoy that kind of conversation with clients to help them to kind of unpack. Um, maybe what the instrument is telling them, but also connecting that again with their context and their reality so that they could see that this is real and how this matters, and therefore moving forward in very tangible ways, what we can do. Yeah, it's a fascinating context, and I agree with that. When you see that kind of uncertainty in leaders, it makes it more difficult to let go. And I think that's obviously one of the big themes of our discussions is, how do leaders empower their people, guide them toward goals, arm them to succeed, and then allow them to have the space needed to do their job, and I think there's a lot of different reasons for this. One of them I always talk about, of course, is people are so focused as they enter the workforce and move upward, on their own performance and their own immediate deliverables, that at some point when it becomes more about not my deliverables, but as a leader it's more about how I drive and encourage my people to deliver. It's through my team rather than my immediate performance that is the true measure. And that's when we really move from an individual role to a leadership role. And I think there we have to really show, and that's I think where a lot of times we have hard times letting go, because leaders like to own their successes. I think that a lot of times, right, if I hand this off to the team and they do great things, well, am I still recognized as being effective in my role? There are a lot of insecurities that kind of shift can bring up. And it's a fascinating topic, because you're absolutely right. To drive high performance in organizations, leaders have to do that through and with their people, rather than kind of personally as a result of their actions. That's sort of the mindset that that you're seeing as well.
Pretty much. And I think also part of it has to do with part of it also is the anxiety of where do I go from here? How do I evolve? What opportunities will be available to me further on? And again, this comes from a situation where the idea of losing everything. Everyone is always plagued with this idea that things could go catastrophically wrong in my life. It is something that most people will think about at some point in their career. I think it's just quite proximate for people in Rwanda, particularly people in senior positions. If you've basically, bootstrapped your family from a situation where, there was trauma, but also severe economic kind of deprivation, and through your hard work and determination, you've got a good job and you're in the middle class and your kids are at good schools. Like, the idea that you're going to risk that by letting half a dozen people in your team show your boss that they're better than you, it carries much heavier consequences than folk who are like, maybe the boss will get the wrong end of the stick and I'll find another job and all be fine. So I guess in labor markets, which are a little bit more brittle, it's much harder to say to people, help other people be successful, because people will recognize, your role in that success. It's a harder story to sell.
Yeah. No, I absolutely connect with that, and that's something that's not unique to Rwanda either, right? That's something we deal with all over the world and across Europe all the time, and it's an important one. And I think it's part of the natural kind of evolution of leadership, and part of that learning journey. So it's nice to be able to help people on that. By the way, I put out a quick little banner there for anyone who might have any questions. Please feel free to type those into the chat. Anyone who's watching, happy to take those. So fantastic. So there are a couple different ways, and I think we were starting to talk about this before. There are a couple different broad ways that leaders control, if you will, or sort of box in employees. One is directly through the kind of strategies that we measure in leadership impact. Their direct actions and feedback and those sorts of things. And the other is more organizationally in terms of, with reference to human synergistic, organizational climate and all of the systems that we've designed in there in order to drive. So maybe that's I always find those to be interesting things to look at. Maybe that's a topic to discuss briefly. Where are you, how are you seeing leaders exercising this constraint, the concern? How are they kind of putting in those guardrails in their own actions or in the business?
Really, really good question. In the leadership impact research we've done, it's mainly through monitoring and through feedback, and also creating a setting. So just to give a bit of background on that, monitoring is, what do you let people see you observing to some extent? Are you observing mistakes?
What are you paying attention to?
Yeah. Are you celebrating excellence, or are you celebrating exceptions? And what's interesting is that in most of the research that I see, leaders think they celebrate excellence much more often than the organization thinks they do. That's the first one. And the second one is they generally, in fact, this isn't always true, but they do say, I find exceptions often, and their team say, yep, you find exceptions often. And the ratio between those two things is out of whack. So in general, people are giving negative feedback much more often than they are positive. And the challenge with that is that it creates a lack of confidence, and folk then are kind of holding back. It's like, I will do everything. I will put my energies into getting all the little things right, because the last thing I want is my boss calling up the fact that I haven't really done well. Yeah.
And
so
there's your perfectionism.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the challenge that leaders are imposing. And how I see that translate, I have had the luxury of doing allies or leadership impact research together with culture research. And what's really interesting for me is that then feeds into the job design parts of culture. And what that relates to is how much love are people allowed to feel about their work. And this was something that I came into the area of health economics and market access in my career after about, a decade or so at Merck. And the thing that amazed me about the people who did that work is, God, they loved their jobs so much. They loved doing this kind of analysis that allowed us to demonstrate to governments and others that if you plonk this intervention into your health system, it's going to save all these lives. I mean, the models are amazing. They're powerful. They really guide decisions. And the people who did that work loved doing that work. And the key thing about motivating people who did that work was, well, give them more of that work to do and let them own the consequences of the work. Let them talk to the scientists, let them talk to the clinicians, let them talk to the government. In other words, these people are, like pigs in excrement. So just give them more excrement to flop around in, and they'll be perfectly happy. And that's the thing, is that often leaders don't like that kind of mess, and they want to clean the stalls up, and the pigs are very unhappy because they're in these pristine stalls and they don't have stuff to play in. And that, I think, is one of the challenges that I'm seeing, is that the sort of, you spoke about leadership strategies, this kind of control focused, I'm going to find mistakes, I'm going to give you negative feedbacks when you do things wrong. It means that people lose their love of the work. Then the job becomes survival oriented. I am going to work hard to make sure that I please my boss. And I know I please my boss because I don't get stressed at me. Hopefully they get stressed at someone else. As opposed to, the boss doesn't really matter. I am going to get into the field. I'm going to work with customers. Maybe your job is business development in a bank, and I'm involved in the construction sector and I see all this stuff happening. Wouldn't it be amazing if my portfolio of customers included all the major projects in Kigali? That is what I care about. And I'm going to build my relationships. I'm going to wine and dine, and I'm going to be the trusted provider of finance to all this construction that's happening. That's where my love is going to be. Now, if you've got a controlling boss, you're not going to have the mind space to do that. And so that's the thing. It's like, how do you as bosses say to people, please fall in love with the work. Fall in love with the work, with all its messiness, all its chaos. Like, you get intimate with anything in life, it's a mess, always. And that's where your love and passion comes from. Create the space where people can have that relationship. Then you see stuff flying. Then you see like real value gets created, real brilliance happens. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. So just for reference, we're talking about, the ways essentially that leaders and organizations influence culture and behavior of employees. And that's breaking down really into aspects of leadership, how leaders and managers execute their responsibilities and how that influences other people. And secondarily, what we call organizational climate, which are systems and structures essentially in the organization that influence. So, things like how we reward people, how goals are set. And what we're talking about now is referring to aspects of job design essentially. Um, and it's an area that's really interesting. I've always been particularly focused on those giant job design factors. When we think about them and how they influence behavior in organizations, um, I find that, and the other second, and I'll come back to them. The other issue of these climate factors is that they really are often overlooked. It's interesting how frequently, organizations are fairly clear on other aspects of climate. We know what our mission is, and that's been communicated. Goals are clear and possible, and and communication is channels are functioning, and so on. But we haven't, and it's really interesting. We haven't really, we've overlooked the opportunities that we have in those job design factors. So just for people's reference, I mean, we're talking about things like significance, which is, task identity, which is really, do you clearly know what your job is, kind of what the boundaries are on what I can do, what I take ownership for. Significance aspects have to do with why my job is important, why it matters, how it helps to contribute to this organization's success and performance. And interdependence is one of my favorite factors in that area, which is, do I clearly understand essentially how my work impacts other people's ability to do good work in this organization? If I do good things, how that not only helps push us forward, but how that has a positive impact on others. And if I don't, how that has a consequence. And just having clarity on those things, what is my role, why is it important, how does it matter, gives people the kind of structural information and room to act that then encourages those constructive behaviors, right? If I know why my job matters, and I know what decisions I can make, and I know why good helps and so on, then I can think creatively about how I could do things better next time, or I know how best to apply my efforts to do great things. And you start to literally facilitate those behaviors that we need in the organization to perform at our best, that high performance. So and it's kind of too bad that those areas are overlooked, because I find them to be some of the ones that are most immediate to employees. That's what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. What is my job? Why does it matter? Those are sort of fundamental. So I always concerns me when they're overlooked. But I also say, and then I'll stop for. I love those as a development lever. If when we do this kind of assessment and we find that those aspects of job design are underloved at the moment, what a great development opportunity, because we get to talk to our people and communicate to everyone so many positive messages about what is this business doing, and what is your role, and why does it matter, and what is good work, and what difference does that make. And I think that's a really helpful, positive, clear kind of initiative, and boy, does it make a tremendous difference in terms of kinds of things we're talking about.
I mean, it's kind of, I mean, when I first learned the kind of the culture survey background, and I'm not going to put this down as a gap in your teaching, John. I'm going to put it down as a gap in my comprehension. I initially thought that job design was kind of, it was job descriptions, it was technical, it was how does this relate to that. And it was like, when I first came across it, I was like, this looks onerous. And exactly as you've articulated, it's actually not. It's about creating joy. It's about creating love of work. It's about giving people that slightly
allowing for that.
Yeah, and it's giving people, giving people the kind of giving people the freedom, but also the excitement, the fear, the kind of anxiety of, oh my God, I actually like, it's me now. It's just down to me. I'm the one doing this. Let's see what I can do with it. But also, to your point, both in terms of significance and interdependence, those are also hugely motivational things. If people understand my organization is awesome. It's doing this incredible stuff. I spoke earlier about Inkamoko. I mean, you do your job well at Inkamoko, you can lift scores of people out of poverty. I mean, what's more motivating than that?
Right.
It's actually really understanding that if I do my job, granted, it may feel boring. Maybe I'm just approving loans on a spreadsheet, but take that person, plonk them into a camp, and give them a feeling of who you're giving money to and what they're doing with that money. And then it's like, oh my God, I will get this spreadsheet done before the end of today because I know it's liberating so many people from dire circumstances. So that's something. And interdependence as well. If I don't do my job well, it means other people then are struggling in doing their work. And these people I care about, I want to serve them well.
There you go.
And then it goes back to the points that we were saying earlier about, well, what does a leader do? I mean, either as a leader, you can scrutinize the spreadsheets and say, you know, you made an error in cell F7, or you can take the person and next time you do a field visit, bring them along and take them and show them how important their work is. I can promise you they're going to pay more attention to their cell errors if they know the consequence of their work than knowing they're scared about you scrutinizing their spreadsheets. And anyway, as a leader, you can't scrutinize all the spreadsheets. You've got to trust that people will have integrity in their own work, and you've got to give them a reason to have that. And I think that's where the real kind of change leadership comes in.
And you're right. Integrity, just what you said at the end there really caught my attention, because integrity is true. And when you try to control as leaders, if we really do that too much, you get to a point where you're going to have to worry about the integrity of what you're getting. I remember working with a very highly aggressive organization. The culture was what we call aggressive defensive, very individualistic, a lot of conflict going on, a lot of belief that we get the best out of people if they're, fighting against one another and competing and so on. And anyway, I remember talking to the CEO, and he had a team with him always, and it was like 5 people. And he was very proud of the fact that he could ask his team any question about the business and they would know the answer. I mean, any question. It was amazing. Little details, things you couldn't possibly think people would recall, and they had all the answers. And he said, "See, this is how I get, I get the right answers. I know everything because I put pressure on these people. They are expected to know everything. This is why aggressive behavior works, aggressive culture works, because see, I know anything at the snap of a finger." And I said, I thought, well, that's kind of impressive. And then I went and talked to his team when the leader wasn't there. And I said, well, how do you know all that stuff? And they said, well, to be honest with you, we don't. We just make it up on the spot because we have to know the answer. We have to have an answer. So we come up with one. So, and that's when, the real illusion of those aggressive patterns is apparent. The leader is convinced they've really got, all the information at their fingertips, and they've got wrong information at their fingertips. And, that's the kind of integrity you have to be careful of if we use those approaches, because people begin, doing the things that they believe is expected. And if those things are not actually driving performance, and that's a hard, it's strange, but in organizations and leadership roles, that's a hard distinction to make in many cases, whether what I'm driving in my people is actually leading us forward, or whether that might be getting in the way more than it's helping. I always thought that was a funny example. We don't know the answer. We just make it up.
I mean, it reminds me of the kabuki theater of kind of doing reviews, which I think for every business, sometimes you have regional global leaders that come to visit, and then, how do you put a show on for those folks? And that, I think, takes up an inordinate amount of energy. Sometimes it can be useful. I think you've got to have accountability, and you've got to be able to demonstrate, that you know your work and so forth. But in addition, you can use that kind of stuff much more effectively if you kind of bring focus to where value is really created, like demonstrate at the front line how people are performing well, showcase good work, that kind of stuff. So absolutely, there are kind of ways to do it in a way that enrich the organization, and there are ways that do it that erode the integrity and the strength of information within the organization. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to understand and to look at and to help clients to learn. So learn about their own organizations and how these things are happening. Fantastic. Very good. So I don't know, one of the other things I like to look at in data, and especially in leadership impact reports, and I don't know if you have this, so kind of off script, but
Mm-hmm.
looking at once you get large enough groups of leaders, you can start
Mm.
to kind of look at feedback, because part of what we receive in those instruments is feedback from the people whom we are leading as leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and describing the effectiveness of the leaders. And in the impact tools, by the way, I've always really liked the effectiveness questions. I think they're quite direct and to the
Mm,
point.
mm, mm.
And I always like going through that kind of data within an
Yeah,
organization once we get enough leaders, because you can
yeah.
start to see, within our business, how
Mm,
different leadership approaches not only are affecting our people, but how, what they're saying about that. Is this
yeah.
helping me to do my job better? Is this leader inspiring and motivating or not? Anyway, have you done some of this in terms of what we would
Yeah.
usually call like composite reports, and
Yeah,
looking within?
absolutely, absolutely. So,
Okay.
I mean, I've done that across the board for all the leadership impact reports I've done in Rwanda. In
Mhm.
general, they're pretty good. I mean, most of it is trending to the right side of average. So you've got,
Yeah.
particularly on the organizational effectiveness, helping other people be effective, bringing out the best in people. Those scores are very high.
Yeah.
The scores that are interestingly low is time. And again, this could reflect the sort of lack of confidence in the future that a lot of
Yeah.
leaders may struggle from, in that the time focus in Rwanda is very short
Short
term,
term. Yeah.
very
Short term
short
versus
term.
long term
Yeah.
orientation. Yeah.
And I think
Okay.
a lot of that has to
Mm.
do also maybe with the sort of more reactive leadership, responding and reacting to short-term crises, and that being a lot
Yeah.
of the where a lot of the attention goes. But
Yeah.
across the other elements, it's been surprisingly good. Stress is also something actually which comes up quite a bit.
Interesting.
That was below average as well. So most, you've got, in aggregate, leaders tend to be more stressed than the average. So stress is a lower than average score, and likewise, the least effective leaders tend to be the ones that are visibly the most stressed. So those are
Yeah.
two that are interesting:
Yeah.
high stress
I've always,
and low term
yeah.
orientation.
Yeah, I've always found that to be fun to look at in data. It shows the win-win, and that it really excellence, it brings out the best in people and is healthy. Meaning, when we look at people who are described as being the most effective leaders by
Mm,
others, people who they
mm,
lead, they're described as being highly effective, highly inspiring, trustworthy, and not stressed out of their
yeah,
minds.
yeah,
These
spot
people
on.
are,
Yeah, yeah,
the whole
yeah,
topic of flow is right
yeah,
there. But when you look at people who, feedback of leaders who, aren't receiving the best feedback, it's not only that they're not trustworthy and they're not
yeah,
taking, anyway, they're also they're not, they're obviously stressed. It's
yeah,
not good for the
yeah,
individual. Y- anyway, yeah, leaders inherently, I think, have some recognition of the impact that they're having, at least it may be unconsciously. I think leaders recognize, at least when they're not getting what they want to be getting out of their teams, they recognize that that is in some ways a reflection of themselves. I think that's the purpose of these tools, is to make this
yeah.
clear so that leaders can own it and shape it, rather than recognizing that this isn't really working, and then, anyway, we kind of can carry on with with that approach.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the one thing that's yeah, I mean, the thing that's
Mhm.
interesting is I mean, it's something I've experienced in my own leadership, but also that I observe with folk that I'm coaching, particularly because when you take these results and you're then given the luxury of having multiple conversations with people, some of the
Mhm.
stuff comes out. Um, and the key thing is with it is that, you know, I mean, it's still stressful because you've got to have courage. I mean, I think that's the key thing, is just having the courage. Letting go is something that requires a high level
Right.
of personal courage. But the reason you would do it is because the reward is higher performance and better personal.
Right.
You get a dividend in terms of just being less paranoid and less
Correct.
anxious, and you
Correct.
can trust that you can let go of things and know the results. So it's almost kind of like, it
Right.
goes back to that analogy of taking the sail down. Like sailing a boat with all the sails up is immensely stressful because you've got thousands of sailors running around trying to make sure your masts don't break. But if you
Right.
take some sails down, you're doing less work, and you're getting a
Yeah.
higher result. There has actually
Yeah.
been, it's interesting, I put that onto a podcast I did a couple of months ago, and I got, a lot of the comments were hate mail, basically me saying I was telling people to stop working hard, and somehow I had some colonial agenda. This is part of the challenge, is that, there's this addiction to the idea that success comes from aggression and success comes from more. Like if you do more, naturally that's going to lead to a good outcome. And we know from systems theory that's just not true. There are outcomes which remarkably allow you to have a family life and allow you to show up in a good way,
Right.
but also then lead to a better result. I mean, the nicer thing about that as well is that folk who are less stressed, who are sleeping better, who are exercising, who are healthy, are simply going to make better decisions and have better conversations.
Right.
And the quality then, if you're looking at sort of moving into the achievement, self-actualization space, if you want people who are at their most creative, if you want people who are intellectually at their peak, you need people who are sleeping. You cannot do multiple all-nighters and make good decisions. It's not possible. So part of it is that as well. It's like it's getting to actually just physical health and mental health, creating a physically and mentally healthy bunch of folk. And then you're in a position to really work well. And the other thing also, it's kind of like it's a team sport. There's a team sport analogy here too. Something I've done with an organization, which I've absolutely loved, is having deep conversations about objectives and how people can help each other with their objectives. This idea that I've got my 3 or 4 objectives and I have to charge to get them. And it's like, actually, you cannot do those things without the support of people who are lateral to you. So how about you kind of ask for help? And how about you say to people, I'm responsible for distribution, but I don't actually know whether or not my products are landing on the right shelves, but the sales team can tell me that. So why don't you open up to the sales guy and say, help me, give me feedback so that my distributors can get the right stock to the right places at the right time. I can't do that. And do it in a way that isn't complain to the boss because my people can't sell because there's not stuff on the shelf. Just open it up, tell me. And once you get that sort of team dynamic going as well, then a lot of the sort of interpersonal aggression and the interpersonal dismissiveness, again, that's something that's quite, I don't think it's uniquely Rwandan or East African, maybe it's global and universal, but people often will just collapse into this idea of everyone else is useless and untrustworthy and I've just got to do it myself. That is such a human condition. And as soon as you put yourself in that little space, then you're inviting a world of pain for everyone, including yourself. So,
yeah, indeed. That's a tough pattern to stick with.
But it's irresistible for so many of us, including myself. So
no, I do. Yeah, I do recognize another good example of interdependence and how useful that is a thing to help us recognize that one of us doing our job is not going to help this business achieve its goals. It's all of us together, and all that's good stuff. Yeah, and the other point I just briefly wanted to make is when leaders can't let go, they end up creating this self-fulfilling prophecy, and it ends up sort of being a lose-lose, right? So if I'm worried about my team and I don't think that they're up to the task or whatever that insecurity is, and therefore I need to micromanage and check their decisions and all of that, when you look at those teams over time, they never really develop, if you will. They fail. They don't learn how to do their job better. They don't try new approaches. Now we're so dependent on the leader to tell us what actions to take and when and how and all, that not only does it sort of hollow out the job and make it joyless and something that people can't connect to, but it makes it impossible for them to learn and do their work better. And so in the end of the day, the people will say that their jobs are not satisfying and demotivating and frustrating, and the leaders will say that my people don't make decisions and I have to work all night and step in and do everything for them, and this is not good for anyone in either case. But you're right, that ability to start to especially when we feel insecure about our teams, to start to use different approaches, not really just letting go, but initially providing some support, and anyway shifting that focus and creating that balance so that people can own the job. And what you find in the end is not only do people now feel like I have something that is mine and I'm responsible for and I can take ownership of and I can feel proud of when I do it well, that's good for them and they do. But it's also a win for the leaders because they're not having to make every decision and hold everyone's hand and all of those sorts of things. Now I have a proactive team who's able to take ownership and make their own decisions, and that's good for leaders too. So once again, those insecurities seem to be the things that hold us back and get in the way. But if we can get past that, it's amazing how a different approach does create that self-fulfilling. Maybe my team doesn't have as much experience as me, but they've got as much potential. They can do it. So how can I look at them like that and give them, rather than controlling their decisions, guide and give them insights and let them anyway. That different approach makes all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes in leadership development it can happen that fast. A lot of times people are frustrated with, well, culture and leadership development takes so long, and I actually disagree. I have all sorts of I did a webinar not too long ago on how to accelerate culture development, and a big part of that is getting leaders on board and taking the first step. And if leaders can open their minds enough to recognize that, hey, maybe my team isn't really a risk or a problem, maybe my team is an opportunity to build and grow something great and high performing. And if I can look at them that way, then tomorrow I can start doing something differently with them. And that doesn't take long to start creating a real difference.
Yeah, I had a wonderful workshop a couple of weeks ago where the CEO, the day after the workshop, went into their calendar and just withdrew from a dozen meetings. And I was like, oh my God, how powerful is that? That's the kind of symbolism that you need. And so to your point, this stuff, it's also the nicest thing about job design is that it's not, some of it isn't particularly hard work. It's fun. If you're a senior person in an organization, why wouldn't you want to sell the mission of what you're doing to junior people? That's fun. That's enjoyable. Why wouldn't you want to build collaboration and relationships and awareness of what, this is social, this is stuff, this is not kind of wood chopping. This is enjoyable stuff. So it's like, how do you bring your attention to those things, knowing that you're going to get a high yield as well? So to your point, can be done quickly.
Yeah. And that's the other thing about climate factors. We measure them, and organizations are aware of them, even if they're not using HS tools. Organizations know that a mission is a good thing to have and goals are important. And, they're familiar. Feedback is a thing and all of those things. But, one of the things that's always frustrated me over the years is how unsystemic that approach is. And, it's sort of like organizations are going through blindly grabbing at whatever they think it could be. Well, maybe jobs need to be redesigned. Maybe goals maybe we need a different mission statement. No, we spend 9 months writing a new mission statement and we're right where we were in the first place. So anyway, having that ability to really get an objective measurement so that we have some focus of where do we need. And what I usually find is these aren't things that people don't think are important. They're things that we kind of overlooked. We were focused on the goals and the mission, and we forgot to tell people what their job is. That's not hard. It's just we need to know we need to do that.
Spot on. One final point, and then I think we need to hand over to the audience if you've got any questions. But the thing that amazes me about HS is just simply providing the information is so transformational at a personal level, knowing, because folk don't get this. And maybe in Rwanda it's particularly bad, but I think it's universal. Folk do not have the chance to get this feedback from a source which is so proximate. And even though people complain about the length of the forms and the complexity of the questions, it's actually pretty goddamn easy compared to employing new organizations or hiring new HR teams or revising all of your SOPs. Doing a survey takes a couple of hours. Seriously, it's all it is. And what you get from that, to your point, is this comprehensive, rich set of data that you can then say, okay, let's bring our attention to a place that we've neglected, where with very little effort, we can have a transformative impact on people doing the work that drives our business. So I really think the catalyzing effect of this data is extraordinary. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. I mean, on one side, when I think about organizations, one of the things that always kind of amazes me is, I've met a lot of leaders over the, what is it, 17 years I've been in HS, but I haven't met one yet who's a social psychologist or an organizational psychologist. Leaders they're engineers, they're all finance, they have all sorts of different backgrounds. But when you think about it, if you're really leading an organization, your primary function is leading and guiding thousands of people in a coordinated way to do excellent
Yeah.
work. And that's not what they were trained for. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then what
No.
we need to do is try to give them very good, relevant information that
Yeah.
tells them the truth that they can act on and lead them forward. Because, sort of ironically, when you think about it, leaders aren't trained for what they're
Yeah.
actually in charge of. Yeah, it's fascinating.
And also the
Good.
nice thing about people from disciplines like that is they're used to making decisions based on big data sets. And what I find, if you
Yes.
bring them composite reports, if you bring them culture, I mean, the data, there's huge quantities of data in this stuff. It really, really, it gels with them. You get the sense of them saying, whoa, I can treat this stuff the way that I treat other systems. It's like, absolutely, you just need the data.
Right. Indeed. And it's actionable. It's the thing I really like about that as well is, they're accustomed to looking at data, so that's great. That's our specialty. But we're giving them a different kind of data rather than looking at deliverable KPIs and things that have already happened. We're looking at data in terms of the patterns that are playing out. That anyway, the causes behind, and that gives them actions that they can do and things we can change in order to shift outcomes. Because I keep saying it, but too often I think leaders are held accountable for and focusing on things they actually can't directly affect, like employee engagement and trust and what customer orientation and so on. You can't make those things happen, but you can take a step backward in the system and understand what kind of leadership and what kind of environment and leads to people who are able to trust leaders and support clients and so on. And that's the actionable piece that's exciting.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put those into the chat. Fascinating topics. Really enjoy the conversation, Christian. Thank you so much for your insights. One other question, I had while we're waiting for potential questions. Anytime I use leadership impact or management impact with OCI and OEI, I oftentimes pay attention, or I'm always paying attention to climate factors and strategies. So this might not make sense to a lot of people, but again, those things that leaders do that influence behavior, those things in the organization system that influence behavior. And when we look at those across, one of the things I've always really found fascinating is that you see typically parallels. So, for example, if the organization does not have a system by which they recognize good work, good work is recognized and this is the reward or whatever. If there's no system in place for example, positive feedback in the organization, then when you tend to look at individual leaders or cross leaders in that business, they'll tend to sort of underperform in terms of things like the frequency that they give positive feedback. And then you sort of get the double whammy of, I'm in an organization that doesn't have any way of recognizing my good work, and at the same time my leader or manager isn't recognizing good work. And that is and I always find that interesting, because you're also seeing how the climate is really reinforcing and teaching leaders and managers what's appropriate here and how to use their authority. But I love finding those for development reasons, because then you've got one topic that we can work on, both in terms of leadership and management coaching, but also systemically. How can we recognize good things happening here and give any kind of positive, feedback recognition for that? Leaders, managers, organization system itself. Have you seen that as well in terms of kind of common patterns between?
Absolutely. And again, it kind of a lot of this comes from the restrictive feedback and restrictive monitoring and restrictive setting a scene, setting a context. And what that translates into, what I'm seeing is it translates into very low job design things like autonomy, flexibility. So just a general level of disempowerment. Sometimes it's actually related. There are also some pieces around participation and around employee empowerment. Sometimes it relates to that. And in the worst scenarios, it relates to intention to stay. You get all of that stuff wrong. Leaders who have the most kind of oppressive profiles leads to the lowest levels of empowerment, and then intention to stay drops. The nice thing, there's nothing nice about low intention to stay, but it does garner people's attention. The challenge in organizations where you have kind of everything is kind of right, everyone's on the right boat, there's good mission, there's good retention, there's good kind of skills and qualities, and it's in the middle where it's a dip. It's kind of like, maybe people are a little bit confused in their day-to-day work, but generally we're doing fine. And it's like, but you could be doing so much better.
Right.
I guess the one nice thing about high turnover is you have high turnover, you're in real trouble. And so it is a bit of a burning platform that you can leverage. So I mean, I'm seeing those strategies leading to clear indicators at an organizational level, and then it gives you a chance to bolster. It's not just down to the individual leader taking responsibility. You can reinforce it because every day, every week, they're being asked, do you not want to give a promotion to someone? Have you thought about enriching someone's role? Like, how do you bring those rituals in to encourage the leaders along a path? So that stuff is really important. Totally agree.
No, fantastic. Thank you.
Cool.
Oh, and we have a question in the chat, so let me take this back, and I think I can put it up. So, whoops, there we go. So, quick one. Staff in Rwanda often expect micromanagement from leaders. What do you recommend in this case at short term?
I mean, I think you need to push some discomfort back, I think is the key message here. I mean, what I've observed often, the leaders that do this best are the leaders that know when to keep quiet, and leaders who know when to, even if you know the answer, just hang back and see what happens. There are ways of doing that constructively. The challenge with that is it can create a bit of a competitive vibe. If you're asking, you don't say anything and you ask 6 people to come up with an approach, you're then potentially creating a sort of dynamic that might not be healthy. But you have to, I guess, to some extent, you have to create discomfort in your staff, and that discomfort then can lead to some kind of response.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is communication as well. So, how do we, one thing I think of as well, and I've heard this so many times, in organizations, employees expect to be micromanaged or they expect these things. And that may be true. I mean, in a way, that's the definition of culture. These are the expectations that we operate under here. Moving forward, if we want to change that expectation, I mean, one of the first key pieces is to communicate that, we want to change. This is the kind of thing moving forward we want to do more of. So, while we may have been a little micromanagey and a little close in our leadership and management practices in the past, moving forward, we want to give you more ownership, do less micromanaging, and here's why. So, what it is you expect from people in combination with how that's going to help us move forward. So that, even though for my whole job career in that organization may have expected micromanagement because that's the way we've done things, I get the message that something different is going to happen. And as we start to implement that in a constructive way, people will recognize that this is a positive change. This is giving me, like you said, the ability to kind of own and fall in love with what I do, have my piece of work, get some recognition for when I do good things. This is, and that's the kind of positive draw that really pulls organizations forward. But I think making and communicating a clear break from the expectations of the past, and just being honest that yes, in the past we did those things, and that was the way we did. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but the point is, moving forward, again, a different approach is needed. Here's what that's going to look like. Here's how you can help, and that's I think the first steps.
Yeah, I mean, I think that intentionality makes a lot of sense. I think Marco's question also, it's funny how I was reflecting when you were talking a bit on some of the commentary. The nice thing about the culture surveys, you have that text box where people can put stuff. My goodness, some people put a lot of stuff. So you often learn a lot from those comments. And one of the comments that comes up quite a bit is this expectation that, my boss doesn't do enough. My boss, needs to work harder. My boss needs to do more. My boss should be doing all these things for me. So I think, and that, I don't know if that's specific to Rwanda, but I was quite surprised by these high expectations that people had, that their bosses would be in their business doing lots of stuff. So I do think some of that is culturally specific. It's interesting. In Australia, it's completely the opposite. Like, Australians don't want authority anywhere near them. It's like, get the hell out of my space. So, I mean, some of it is quite, some of it I think is quite country specific.
Absolutely.
But to your point, you can't then just go cold. You can't just go quiet. You have to communicate and say, we're trying something else. I want you to develop these skills. I want you to work out how. I'll tell you what to do, but you do it your way and show me what the result is. Maybe it's better than what I could do. Having those sorts of conversations, I think, are critical.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it just it starts with such small things. I mean, I remember so many coaches, things like, well, leaders sitting down with people and asking them, what frustrates you about what you do, or what could be smoother, or what's something that you think we could do to, it's strange, but just asking those kinds of questions. I hate to say it, but is not something that's done in many organizations. And anyway, opening that up, what it's really doing is sending a message to people that you're expected to apply yourself, think, take ownership, apply your own creativity. It's that kind of thing that we need to, and again, sometimes it starts with just very simple, small things, but it's about doing them consistently. If my leader asks me once what my ideas are, that's something. But if they check in each month and how are things going, that sends a message about what I'm expected to deliver, and so taking the time. Taking the time. I think, I don't know if I've mentioned it before, the mirror exercise. I was telling a client about this yesterday, I think. And it goes to your point as well about canceling the meetings. There's an exercise I'll describe very briefly. A couple of our consultants like to use, and it's where leaders are asked to think about sort of how they would like to be ideally seen by the people whom they lead. What descriptors and what terms would you like for people to say about you as a leader? So, they write things like, accessible and trustworthy and supportive and all those good things. And they describe that. And then they're asked to sort of turn the page over and have a look at their calendar and look at how they spent their time the last 10 days, 10 work days. And it's how much of that really goes together. And what they end up finding is that, I want to be accessible and trustworthy and supportive and all of that. But if I look back in the last 10 days I've been in the office, I haven't even, haven't really been in front of my people asking those kinds of questions. That's the, So those are fun things to create awareness around. Good. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you, Christian, for your time. I think it's a fantastic topic. I think it's, of course, a relevant one, really globally. I love your projects that you've been doing in Rwanda. I think that not only is a great way to kind of get into these topics, but also see the unique things that you're seeing in that country and how that comes from history. I think, culture is absolutely informed and driven by history. So I think it's always cool to see how that's coming across and informing what leaders are doing and how you see that in organizations. And as we move to Germany and Switzerland and other parts of the world, you see different things as well. And anyway, that adds a lot of context and color and is helpful for organizations to understand more clearly where we are and why that is, and more importantly, where we're going and how we get there. So thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you, John, and always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your support over the past year.
Thank you. No, absolutely. I look forward to very much more. And thank you, everyone who joined. We'll be recording this as we have and post it on our website. Hope it's helpful for you or for your leaders in your organizations. Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to the next one.